Hello, and welcome to the Brave New Weed podcast. And now, here's your host, Joe Dolce.
Welcome to episode 79 of the Brave New Weed podcast. These are high-minded conversations for the post-prohibition era, and this episode, we're having a very high-minded conversation for the post-COVID era. I'm Joe Dolce, I'm your host, and with me is my co-host, Matthew Hendershot. Matthew.
How you doing, Joe? How's the great Southwest isolation treating you?
Well, you know, it's treating me quite well. Well, for one thing, the temperature is going to be 100 today, so I'm actually sort of excited to see what that feels like. And it's a beautiful place right now. The desert is in bloom, and I'm quite fortunate to be here. I feel very lucky every day. How's life in Germany?
Yeah, man, let me tell you, spring has certainly sprung. The weather is phenomenal and beautiful, and it's really quite odd because with all the social distancing and all the isolation and all the stay-at-home stuff, you can walk around the city and it's just mostly empty of people and absolutely beautiful, and it creates a super, super surreal experience that is unlike anything I've ever experienced before.
Well, that's going to lead me right into this conversation because this is the new normal and the entire world is facing this, right? The questions are pretty basic, like who are we and what do we need? What do we need for our mental health, for our physical health in order to survive? Not only to survive, but really to thrive in this, whatever this post-COVID world is going to look like. And our guest this week is Dr. Julie Holland, who I think is a brilliant psychiatrist. And she's here to talk to us about the science of connection and how we can use plant medicines really across the board to help us find health and happiness in ways that modern medicine has often overlooked. And I think the time is right now because in this great pause, we seem to be looking at everything anew. Don't you think?
Yeah, definitely. It's a forced shift of perspective. And I've been talking through with like psychologists and therapists and stuff as well about this concept of like, you know, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And we've had like the top two structures of that ripped away from us, right? Those are no longer things that we are worried about in this state. It's more like, all right, back to basics. Are we getting fed? Are we taking care of ourselves? Are we sheltered? Are we safe? And I think a lot of people are seeing the world in a different set of like, oh, some of those things that I was spending a lot of my time and energy on are not actually necessary to my life.
Well, I think the whole world is seeing it, which makes this, you know, a very unprecedented moment. Don't you think? Completely
agree. And I'm thrilled to have Dr. Holland back on the show. When we had her back on episode 40, I believe it was just an amazing conversation. She's so knowledgeable about this plant and about its uses. And I can't wait to share this conversation with our listeners. Before we get into the interview, Joe, listeners, this episode is brought to you in part by Sun and Earth Certified, the nonprofit certification program for regenerative organic cannabis that actually celebrated its 1-year anniversary on Earth Day 2020. Sun and Earth was founded by cannabis industry leaders, experts, and advocates who share a commitment to regenerative organic agriculture, farm and farm worker protections, and community engagement. In just 1 year, Sun and Earth has more than doubled in size, certifying 32 farms in 5 states, California, Oregon, Colorado, Washington, and Wisconsin, whose products are sold at more than 350 retail outlets. Sun and Earth is committed to shifting the cannabis cultivation industry into a cleaner, healthier direction, and its regenerative farming standards offer a model for ecological resiliency in a time of global crises. For more information on Sun and Earth, please visit their website at www.sunanearth.org. Listeners, you can join the conversation with Brave New Weed today by visiting us on any of our social media platforms. Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, all at Brave New Weed, will bring you to a place where you can like, comment, share the show, interact with other listeners, and keep the conversation going. Together, we are the world of Brave New Weed.
Our guest this week is Julie Holland, MD. Julie's a psychiatrist who specializes in psychopharmacology, and she has a private practice in New York City. She's an author. She's written several books. Her 2010 book, Weekends in Bellevue, chronicled her 9 years running the psychiatric ER as an attending physician at NYU School of Medicine. So Julie has some resilience. She knows something about that. She's frequently featured on Today, and she was a big part of CNN's documentary series Weed. She was also the editor of The Pot Book and Ecstasy, the Complete Guide. Very interestingly, she's the medical monitor for several clinical studies on treating post-traumatic stress disorder, one using MDMA psychotherapy, and another examining the effects of various strains of cannabis. Her 2016 best-selling book, Moody Bitches, has been translated into 11 languages, and her new book is called Good Chemistry, The Science of Connection from Soul to Psychedelics. It's out this coming June. Interestingly, this book is all about how human connection is determined by our biology. It comes at a very interesting time when our human connections have been extremely disrupted by COVID. And I'm so happy to have Julie on the show with us. Listen in. Julie Holland, so nice to talk to you again. You know, when we hi Julie, keep talking to me. Let me hear your volume. Wait, let me hear that
What
volume.
am I riding on? When I was a kid, we had CB radios, and you would be like, breaker 19, what am I riding on? Which was basically not guess my vehicle, but like, how loud am I coming through?
You're riding good, honey. You're coming through loud and clear.
Okay.
Where are we talking? I'm in Tucson, Arizona. Where are you? I
am in, quote, upstate, end quote, New York. Out north of the city, about 75 minutes in Dutchess County.
So out of the epicenter of COVID, correct?
I'm in the woods. Yeah, I've never been quite so happy about living in the woods in the middle of nowhere. Like, it's a real pain in the ass when people want you to fly somewhere for a conference. But at the moment, it's okay living kind of far away.
I agree totally. A little out of the mainstream. So, you know, when we last spoke on episode 40 of the Brave New Weed podcast, it was all about oxytocin and pleasure chemicals. And I remember very clearly that one of the best ways to rev up your oxytocin was to hug.
Yeah.
Well, so those days are over, Julie.
I know.
What are we doing now?
Hat tip to Alanis Morissette. I'm coming out with a book in a few months that is all about, like, ditch your computers, ditch your phones. What we need is, face to face, eye to eye, pheromone inhaling, hugging, cuddling, orgasm, touching. And the thing that is making us miserable is how isolated we are and how separated we are. And we need to come together physically to make us healthy and happy. So luckily, there still are some other suggestions in this book besides that.
Wait, before you go on, what's the book called? Let's give it a plug now, because I'm sure its sales potential is really high here in the age of COVID. What's it called? Go on.
It's called Good Chemistry, The Science of Connection from Soul to Psychedelics. And so one of the premises is that, one of the ways you can get your own natural good chemistry going is via oxytocin. And actually, one of the things the book talks about is that the way that oxytocin works and the way that oxytocin gives pleasure is actually through the endocannabinoid system. So the book ends up being quite a bit about cannabis and other endocannabinoids and how they interact with oxytocin, but it's also about other psychedelics besides cannabis, because as you know, I believe that cannabis belongs under the umbrella of psychedelics. It certainly is a plant medicine, and the book is very pro plant medicine. But I talk quite a bit about other psychedelics besides cannabis and how they sort of mimic the good chemistry that you get from being held, from being nursed, feeling like you belong and like you're safe. So there's a lot of things happening now with COVID that are making us feel unsafe.
That's for sure. Yep.
Some of us are spending more time in fight or flight than we would like, or that's really healthy for us. And certainly it's hard to feel, I mean, even if we had like great government response and doing everything right, we would still be a little anxious because there's this invisible thing that can kill you. And that is absolutely terrifying. But this added layer of the incompetence and the people who are supposed to be helping to make sure that we're safe and that we have our needs met. It's a little bit like having some sort of crazy parent or something where, life is already traumatic enough and chaotic enough. And you're adding this other layer of unpredictability and chaos.
Yeah. Like that crazy parent is really missing in action, huh?
Yeah.
Or too present. Maybe just too present. I'm not really sure.
I've been calling Trump the great traumatizer for many years now. And, he continues to just sort of add insult to injury and add trauma to trauma with what's going on now. So it's very frustrating. I made the mistake of getting online last night before bed, which I always tell my patients, you have to totally unplug and wind down. And like last night, I'm in my bed and I'm like, I'm just going to check Twitter one more time, and it was like, one of the things I learned at Bellevue actually is that I can't sleep when I'm angry. Like I can get up and deal with a patient or deal with a nurse or do whatever. And then like go back to my room and try to go back to sleep as long as I'm not pissed off at somebody. And if I'm angry, there's just no way I was going to sleep. And I think Twitter just got me angry last night.
How was your sleep?
Not Twitter itself. The Trump is what's making me
the ignorance.
I do not want to blame the messenger.
You can't blame Twitter for Trump. No, I mean, this is not fair. Although I do think they should ban him myself. But
that would be very interesting.
That is my prescription for reducing one level of distress. But I there's so many things to talk about already. You already got my brain revved. But I wanted to talk about just first, like mental health. During COVID, maybe there's some things you have to say that we don't already know. Let's talk about it. But I was thinking sort of being the optimist that I really am not often, but post-COVID, like what are we going to do to get over this? And what are we going to do like in a world where maybe handshaking is over or kiss, kiss, hug, hug is not going to happen again for a very long time, if ever. I mean, I happen to be reading this book Spillover, which is about how viruses spill over from animals into humans. And with environmental degradation, it seems like this is our future now. Yeah. This doesn't seem like an isolated instance, especially if you look back over the last 20 years with SARS and you name it, right?
I was just talking to my husband Jeremy and we were just out walking in the woods and we were talking about how there's certain cultures that are already pretty comfortable wearing face masks, and like there are certain tourists, like Japanese tourists or Chinese tourists, sometimes when they come into Manhattan and you see them with their face masks, and you're just like, what's up with that? And it's like, well, that's just the way they are there. It's like, well, they're maybe we're a little ahead of the curve. Like, maybe the new normal is that we, for the foreseeable future, are touching hearts instead of elbows and, wearing masks where you maybe have to wink because they can't see a smile. There's going to be a new normal now, and then there's going to be a new normal later. And a lot of questions about when we come out the other side of this, who are we going to be and what are we going to need? And certainly, when I'm talking to my patients, they're people who are anxious or I'm sorry, I'm going to use a label that perhaps is a little pejorative, but like people who are neurotic, they want to know. And I do too. I mean, I'm a planner, I've got my calendar, like where I'm going in 6 months and what's happening in 12 months and, what's going to happen. That's what anxiety is all about, right? Fear of the future, what's going to happen in the future. And like now we are all anxious because none of us really know, when is the peak? When is the plateau? When can we go outside again? When can we be with our families again? And, I postpone my wedding. When can I have my wedding? When can I have this funeral or memorial? I mean, this is the other thing is that we can't grieve the way we've always grieved in the past, which was, face to face and arm in arm and gathering to honor somebody. And like, that's out the window now. So, there will be on the other side of this, a few things. One is there will definitely be post-traumatic stress disorder, right? If nothing else, anybody who's working on the front lines of medicine is going to come out of this with some sort of, maybe not incapacitating, but, some sort of trauma and some sort of psychic scars from what they've seen and what they've gone through. I will tell you as a doctor that we are not used to being wrong. losing fights, losing patients. You know, we get hundreds on our exams. We get, you know, we get into the colleges of our choice, and, you know, things go right for it. You know, we work hard, and then our patients don't die. And so it's just, everything is sort of turned on its head. So there's going to be more PTSD, number one. Number two, there's going to be survivor guilt, right? The people who didn't die are still going to have, you know, being carrying the load of, you know, my sister died or my mother died, but I didn't. Why me? Why not me? You know, survivor guilt is a real thing. It's not nearly as destabilizing as PTSD, but it can trigger self-soothing and addictive behaviors, things like that. So you have to mention it. But there's also this, I keep seeing this metaphor that I really like, which is this idea of cocooning, you know, that we have eaten ourselves into oblivion. You know, we've consumed so much, and we have been such greedy capitalists. And now we are forced to go inward, and something new is going to come out the other side of this when we get out of this cocoon.
You mean we're going to go from consuming to cocooning? Is that your idea?
I think that this, in a way, is the cocooning, you know, that we all have to sort of prune back what we were doing and, you know, get by on less of everything.
Definitely.
Especially human contact. And, you know, we have to be inventive and create new ways of connecting, which I think, you know, obviously a lot of us are. You know, we're sort of resigned to having digital connections for now and making the best of them. And they're not, honestly, you know, they're not as bad as I thought when I was writing Good Chemistry. Because Good Chemistry is like, you know, put down your phone, shut your laptop, go outside. It's beautiful, you know. But it turned, and I sort of made the point, you know, there's this great saying in addiction medicine, which is you can never get enough of something that almost works. And the synthetic connection is sort of scratching around an itch, and you're not really totally satisfying it the way that, you know, real human connection face to face would do. But I am discovering that it is somewhat, it's close enough. You know, it's not as devoid of content as I thought. The technological connections. My niece had a baby recently, and she was just. While we were sort of FaceTiming, she just put the phone down so that I could just watch her baby while we were talking. And I'm just watching her baby when we're talking. And I'm like, ooh, I am getting that oxytocin. Like, I know what it feels like. I'm like, ooh, I'm getting a little bit of that oxytocin thing. And, you know,
you were getting a digital oxytocin rush?
I was. And, you know, we know that women can, like, hear their babies cry on the phone and their milk comes in, right? So, I mean, you know, there is still something that is getting through. And, you know, giving you that sort of warm glow, that good chemistry, that connection gives you. In Good Chemistry, I talk a lot about how cannabis helps connect you to your body. And that is one way to stay calm and stay healthy, is to not be so disconnected from yourself. But I also think that cannabis really helps me anyway, really connect with nature. You know, if I'm out in the woods or in the lake or in a swamp or something, you know, I'm so much more sort of agog and in awe over natural beauty if I happen to be a little bit altered. You know, I know people can get there other ways, and I'm sure I can also get there other ways. But I do have the sense that cannabis helps us sort of tap into these connections. These, you know, the good chemistry of like a good solid connection that you can have with your own body. Or with the earth, you know, and with nature. So, and then I think maybe you may need the big guns and need sort of psychedelics to feel more connected maybe to the cosmos. Although I would say maybe, you know, one of the things I learned, you know, with psychedelics, they tend to tickle this one receptor, 5-HT2A, and a lot of people call it the psychedelic receptor because it's pretty specific to psychedelics. But it turns out if you have enough THC, you do end up stimulating that same receptor.
Oh, do you really? Is that true?
Yeah. So,
is that considered a cannabinoid receptor in that case?
No,
Just explain that a little bit to me.
I'll tell you what it is. Actually, is there's something called the dimerization, which is when it's not really as simple. I mean, first of all, the brain is way more complicated than I could ever possibly write about, and I will say that Good Chemistry sometimes uses kind of broad strokes to explain the neuroscience. But there's, and I explained this in Good Chemistry, there's something called dimerization, which is when two receptors actually couple and connect.
Yeah.
And so, one of the coolest things I learned is that the 5-HT2A receptor and the oxytocin receptor actually do couple and create a dimer. But I also learned that CB1 and 5-HT2A do couple and make a dimer, which means that you get this crosstalk that if you're high enough, you could start to feel like you're tripping. And certainly we've heard stories at least about people who maybe, had a little like too much of a brownie or a cookie or something and felt really too high. And got to that place that they sort of feel like they're tripping, or it starts to feel more like a psychedelic or like a classic psychedelic. I'm trying not to say hallucinogen because it's a loaded.
It's not hallucinogen. It's never. It definitely. It doesn't feel. Yeah, hallucinogen is the wrong word. God, I wish I've had that experience with THC, but I can't really say that I have ever, as a matter of fact. And usually when I have too much through an edible, it goes south. It goes the wrong way. It doesn't bring me up. It doesn't bring me connection. It brings me just like into a cocoon. That's where I go.
Yeah.
Usually withering in a corner, going the opposite way.
There's just this idea of the default mode network, which is sort of like the egocentric, how am I doing? Am I doing okay? Where am I going to be? Am I where I want to be? Like, it's very kind of self-absorbed neural network. And the idea is that when you are, when you're in that place, when you're tripping, when you sort of lose your sense of self and you have ego disintegration, then you have a quieting of the default mode network. My assumption is that some of us, when we're high on cannabinoids, can sometimes get into that place where we have an enhanced default mode network, when we are sort of obsessing or ruminating about our self and our egos and things like that. I mean, I don't think it's you're guaranteed to go there. I mean, I in terms of harm reduction in COVID-19, as long as we're talking about edibles, I mean, I'm seeing a lot of things on Twitter or Facebook about how people who want to enjoy cannabis products during this time, it's really better if you don't smoke, and so you should consider edibles. And while I appreciate on the face of that is good harm reduction advice, I also know that it's very hard for people to adjust the dosing of their edibles. And, I mean, the joke I always make is like, how often do you eat a quarter of a cookie?
Yes.
And sometimes, depending on where you're getting your products, I mean, my sister lives in LA, and she gets these edibles that are like 100 milligrams in a candy bar or per cookie, and like
complete madness, utter madness.
It makes zero sense to me. And I like the idea that people are talking about there being some sort of a standard oral dose, whether that will be 5 or 10. It doesn't mean you can't take 100 if you have that kind of tolerance. But so that's in terms of harm reduction in COVID-19, like, yes, edibles will sort of spare your lungs. I also think that there are ways to inhale cannabis that are less irritating. Like
vaporization.
Well, vaporization is far and away the best, although I really think it has to be made clear that when you're talking about harm reduction vaporization, you and I talked about this, I'm sure, that does not include vape pens. Harm reduction.
No, we're talking flour in a good convection vaporizer is what we're talking about here. Yeah.
So that is better for your lungs than perhaps smoking a joint or a pipe. But I also think, I'm saying if you're smoking through water, like if you're using a bong and you put ice cubes in the bong or something, and you're sort of cooling down the smoke and it doesn't feel particularly irritating to you and you're not coughing, that could be considered another harm reduction measure if you don't have access to a vaporizer.
Yeah. So bong, you like the idea of a bong.
Well, I mean, officially, I have to say I like the idea of people trying not to smoke because it's better to spare your lungs. But I also know as a harm reduction psychiatrist that, you don't want the good to get in the way of the perfect, or the perfect to get in the way of the good. Like, yes, in a perfect world, you would not smoke and you would just have a little bit of edibles and that would be the end of it. And if you can do that, that's great. But if you really feel like you need to smoke, then yes, a vaporizer is better. And then after, if you don't have access to a vaporizer, then I would say a bong with ice is at least harm reduction, and that you're cooling the smoke and you're trying not to irritate the lungs. Now, the bigger question, which I imagine you want to ask about, and I'm not sure that I have a really satisfying answer, is sort of the interaction of cannabinoids in your immune system. And like, are you putting yourself at risk just by using cannabis? Does that make you more likely to catch a virus? Does that make it so that you can't fight off the virus? And that's when it gets very complicated, because we know that cannabis is.
Well, I just want to say, I love the idea that you're interviewing you through me.
Now,
thank you for sort of telescoping that question. Yes, I might want to know that.
If you were a good interviewer, Joe, your next question would be. And then I would say,
if I were to ask that question, what might your answer be?
But I don't know if you're going to have like a whole other podcast about this issue of cannabis as immunomodulator, because it's huge.
I'm curious. I'm curious about it. It was one of the things.
There's a lot of complicated. There's great. I mean, I went down like a couple of rabbit holes looking at all this stuff because, what we know for sure is that there are cannabinoid receptors on a lot of immune cells, and the blanket statement that you could make is that the endocannabinoid system is a body-wide immunomodulating system. And it's not as simple as it dampens immune response or it augments immune response. It really is not anything as one-to-one as that. It's like in some cases it will dampen a response, and in other cases it will enhance a response. But mostly it dampens. And so let's say that, the trade-off is maybe it would make you more likely to get the virus, although the joke I've been making for the past month is like, then I would have the virus, is basically what I would say.
I would be really likely to have the virus these days. Right?
I'm going to tell you, I'm not sure it makes you vulnerable. But I do know in terms of the cytokine storm that everybody is kind of talking a lot about, this idea that a virus doesn't necessarily kill you. It's the body's response to the virus that's going to kill you.
Right.
And, we don't want to blame ourselves here. But so it may be, and people are looking at this, and I don't know the definite answer, but it may be that cannabinoids can help to tamp down a cytokine storm. But whether they make you more or less vulnerable to infection, I can only do my N of one. And, I don't know. I have a lot of friends who smoke pot. None of us are sick yet. That's not good, right? How are you doing? You okay? Me too. Okay. But what I would, like I said, the joke I made is like, if it made you more vulnerable, I think maybe we would know by now if being a pot smoker made you more vulnerable, because all the pot smoker people would be telling their friends, like, look, this isn't going to go well for you. So
yeah, I'm getting sick. You're getting sick. I'm not hearing any of that. And I would think, is there any information on how alcohol affects the immune response?
Yeah. There's tons, I love, I'm very big on Google Scholar. That's like where I love to.
It's great, yeah.
Future. Although my son was telling me about some other site, but there's a lot. You go to Google Scholar and you look at cannabinoids and immune response, or cannabinoid and cytokine, or alcohol and cytokine, or alcohol and immune. There's a lot there to unpack. And I think one of the things that makes it hard to figure out in the field some people will be like, look, if I go to a party, and I get drunk and I come home the next day and I feel lousy and then I got sick. It's like, okay, maybe the alcohol had something to do with your, this idea of strengthening or weakening your immune system. Those aren't really accurate terms in terms of.
Those aren't terms. Yeah, they don't make any sense.
That's how we talk, right? But so you could say, well, you were with a bunch of people, so you could have picked up a virus at the party, and you didn't get a great night's sleep, and you were dehydrated, which makes you more likely to get a virus, blah, blah, blah. Like, there's so many variables that you can't always completely just pinpoint alcohol. So what we do know is don't share joints, right? Like, don't share your pipe with somebody. Like, if you're going to socially distance and smoke, you're going to each need to have your own implement. And in a perfect world, you would both have like volcano vaporizers, but we don't live in a perfect world.
We certainly don't live in that world. Will you put on your other hat for a second? Because I am interested in, all right, what do we do after COVID? How do we come back? What do we do to recover? I mean, it's almost like we're talking about a societal PTSD. I know there have been obviously many societies in the past that have gone through this, but this is maybe the first sort of global PTS response. I mean, this is not just Japan after Hiroshima or Germany after the Nazis. This is like
something that we're all going through together on the planet at once, and that
except for a few Republican governors of southern states, it seems to me.
In their own little world. But I mean, that is one of the good things, is that the virus doesn't discriminate, and it doesn't stop at the borders, and the entire globe is being victimized at once, and maybe there'll be more unity that comes out on the other side. 9/11, it was terrible, but it lasted a couple of hours, and then everybody was shell shocked for a while afterwards, and then we had a lot of other things to distract us, going to war and things like that. But it was something that New York City went through together, and it made us sort of come together. It made the country come together. But this is something that isn't just lasting 2 hours. The trauma itself is going to go on for months, and it's happening to everybody. And it is sort of the great equalizer. So, in my rainbow and unicorn version, we all come together and kumbaya, and we're all on the same planet, and we have to, share. And, we turn from me to we, and we become, democratic socialists, and we have universal health care, and we have basic income, and and everybody unionizes, and the minimum wage doubles. I can go on and on about all. The trauma has sort of laid bare everything that we've all been complaining about and talking about anyway, that we're poisoning the planet, and that there's gross unequal distribution of wealth and resources in America and around the world. But are we going to fix everything on the other side of this? I don't know. Have you exercised every day and learned to tap dance yet while you've been quarantined? Everybody's kind of like pie in the sky. I'm going to learn to play the piano, and I'm finally going to learn Spanish, and I'm going to.
How about a friend of mine just went to Trader Joe's? He lives in Brooklyn. He said it took 4 hours, 2 hours to get in, 1 hour to get through checkout.
Yeah.
Okay, that's what I think people are really doing in the hot zones. They're really struggling with the effects of all of this, and so the answer is no. I haven't quite learned to tap dance yet.
Yeah. I mean, this. I mean, maybe tap dance maybe is a terrible example, but it's this idea that people, and at the beginning, a couple of weeks ago, it was all like, oh, I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that, and I'm going to have all this extra time, and so I'm finally going to blah blah blah. And yet most of us aren't, really tackling those big projects that we thought we would tackle, because we're on high alert to some degree. I mean, we're more in fight or flight and worrying about our physical safety, and the safety of people that we care deeply about. Yeah. And, so there isn't as much bandwidth sort of as I think a lot of us thought there would be. I mean, I've been talking to my patients about this, and this push to sort of continue to be productive. Most of them are sort of, I'm not going to say crashing and burning, flailing, but they're sort of surprised how not productive they are, and how they just can't do what they, would do a few months ago if they had to work from home for a day.
Focus is really hard. I am finding focus sometimes very elusive, and I actually just have to stop. I'm lucky because it's warm and sunny outside, so I can stop and go for a walk alone, of course, or at a great distance from others. But boy, it's hard. I don't have nearly the amount of productivity I once had, even a month ago. Let's put it not that long ago. How about that? But I'm still focused. Go on. And
less focus. And also I would say, sort of less inspiration. A lot of it is what's the point? Things you were working on don't have the same gravitas.
No, they don't have the same pull. They just don't. And that's part of it. Would you call that a sign of depression or just a sign of distraction?
Well, I have a pretty high threshold for what I actually label depression just because of, my training. Like, you could be sort of sad and feel crappy for a day, and that's not depression, And also, what's a normal response versus what's a pathological response, right? I mean, something like I'm on the phone with my patients and they're like, I'm crying, like at least once a day I'm crying. I'm like, yeah, you should. I'm crying too.
You should be crying.
It's terrible. It's like, oh my God, people are dying. Like, it's okay to feel that. I even sometimes play little games with my patients about like, okay, so, put it on your schedule that like every day you're going to sit in like have a chair that you only sit in once a day at 4:30, and you go sit in that chair at 4:30 and you feel the heaviness and the fear, and feel it intensely and sit there for a half hour and cry and feel terrible. And then get up and go back to the rest of your day, and like know during the day that you're going to have 4:30 to break down if you need it. I mean, and it's a little bit like reverse psychology, because if you do that with patients and they're like, fuck you, I'm not going to sit in a chair at 4:30 and feel better. So like,
no, I think that sounds like a great idea. I love the 4:30
like
hour now.
You've given them a container, because we are being traumatized every day. We're being traumatized. And so are you going to feel it? Are you going to let it go through your body? Is it going to get trapped in your body because you're not really dealing with it? I have a good friend who is a really talented baker, and she owns this cafe in the village where we live, and it was getting to the point where she was going to have to close it down. But every time I would see her or talk to her, and how you doing? I'm fine, great, everything's fine, and I was like, yeah, it's not fine, and then she finally said to me, like, I've got this terrible jaw pain and headaches all the time. I don't know what's going on. I'm like, oh, I know what's going on. Do you want to know? I know exactly what's going on. Like, you're saying it's all fine, and it's not. And so your body is like, hello. I mean, your body is you can always sort of tune into your body and let it lead, and it's going to really let you know what's going on. But there are tricks to calm your body. In good chemistry, I talk a lot about, just breathing through your nose, just breathing in and out through your nose will help to calm you and help to get you out of fight or flight and over into the other side, which is the parasympathetic nervous system.
How long should I breathe through my nose?
Forever.
If I'm feeling,
like
if I'm feeling in a panic, how do I mean, it's like a meditation.
Like, if you just switch to breathing in and out of your nose. I'm not going to tell you to take 8 breaths or 10 breaths. I'm going to say every day, all the time, whenever you think about it, you should be breathing through your nose. And that will help to keep you calm. And when we're anxious, we hold our breath, or we're very shallow breathers, or we'll breathe through our mouths. And I will tell you that, people with a deviated septum are going to be at a disadvantage here, because anyone who's an obligate mouth breather, you're not going to have access to that. But
will you explain to me the difference between breathing through your nose and your mouth on the parasympathetic nervous system, please?
In the dumbest, most broad strokes, I will.
Yeah, be dumb. Small brain here.
Breathing through your mouth will trigger the sympathetic nervous system, the fight or flight nervous system, and that breathing through your nose, in and out through your nose, will help to put you in the parasympathetic nervous system, which is the opposite of fight or flight. And it is only in parasympathetic when we can sleep, digest our food, and connect with other people and be open to connection. But it's also the only place and the only time where your body can repair itself. There's no bodily repair happening when you are in fight or flight. It is only going to happen when you're in parasympathetic. And that is why it's crucial that you get out of fight or flight however you can, whenever you can, because it's better for your body and it's better for your relationships.
Do you think this is one reason why meditation usually says focus on the breath in and out of the nose?
Mm-hmm. I think if you are able to meditate, you are going to be putting yourself more reliably in the parasympathetic state. And it's a way to get out of sympathetic. The other way to get out of sympathetic is to just sort of focus on what is actually happening here and now around you, and not what you fear will be happening in the future. Because anxiety is always about projecting into the future. I call it like borrowing pain from the future. Like, you may have pain in the future, but why have it twice? Like, wait for it. Anxiety is all about sort of, it might suck in the future. I'm going to worry about it and I'm going to feel terrible now, even though it's not happening now. So I'm constantly reminding patients to just kind of put yourself back into the here and now and look around you and like, where are your feet? Where are you standing? Take a few breaths in and out through your nose, and just like, right now, I'm not sick. right now I have a roof over my head. I have access to water. I've got some food in the basement. Like, just you have to take a little bit of an inventory of like, okay, right now the catastrophe is not happening. And that's about mindfulness too, right? Just
it is. Yeah. I mean, you're really, I've been meditating a lot. Actually, my meditation practice is one of the benefits of COVID.
Yeah.
I've been taking it very seriously and using it often twice a day.
That's great.
And I do find it centering in a way. And but it's just interesting to hear that these ancient techniques actually have this hard science application. That they actually there's a reason for them. Which you almost never hear about, when you go to meditate in a group, which is also very interesting. And I'm wondering, I think a lot of people's fears, my own included, are economic as well as health.
Yeah,
and economic is,
right.
It is a much more abstract thing. And, standing here and now and breathing through my nose isn't really changing the fact that, I know that a lot of my clients and a lot of the contracts I had are disappearing quickly.
Yeah.
And how does one deal with that kind of existential fear and dread, which is, it's not right now, but boy, when, you got nothing coming in next month, it's going to be there real soon.
I mean, look, the real existential dread is I may die, right?
First and
One.
foremost.
And then number two is like people that I love may die. And then maybe somewhere down around 4 or 5 or 6 is like my investments aren't doing very well. but I do think I feel terrible for older people because they're at higher risk of not surviving an infection, and the money they were counting on is just like gone. Like, at least if you're like in your 30s or 40s or 50s, you're like, well, maybe in 20 or 30 years when I really need this money, things will be okay again. But it's like, not everybody has the luxury of waiting. Like, this idea that it's only a loss on paper, like if you wait longer, it'll come back up.
Wrong.
But yeah, that is a whole other level of a trauma. And, it's more about sort of consumerism and, making sure you have what you have what you need. But I think our culture for a long time, we have been in this mode of acquiring. And we keep getting these messages, maybe it's only on Facebook, but these little messages that there's joy and peace to be had in not acquiring. And not amassing, and that there are other narratives, and there are other ways to live besides just having more and more and more. And I'm wondering about at what point will if ever, will our government sort of switch away from capitalism and consumerism and into something more sustainable. I know that's a terrible word, but like emotionally sustainable, and economically sustainable.
Well, you're looking at a systemic approach, and I'm wondering, I'm thinking personally, really, and for the people I know that are actually really in a panic about finance, is there anything, mental health practitioner, that they can really do at this moment, or is there just nothing? Any thoughts?
Well, don't sell if you don't have to. Wait until things come around. I mean, I use optimism. I will counter, like a patient who is very anxiety prone and is always sort of looking at how terrible things are going to be. And I will say, like, look, you're imagining how bad things are going to be. Why don't you give equal time to imagining that things are going to be great or okay? Like, if you can't stop thinking about how terrible it is, at least, pretend you're like a TV station and you have to give equal time to the other candidate. And like, you could fantasize about, this, I said, like, I joked about, like rainbows and unicorns, but the truth is that you could have an antidote where you fantasize about things working out okay, or even working out well, just to balance out all the negative thoughts you're having.
The negative fantasies. Yeah, it is. I think we can actually discipline ourselves to not only go dark. It's one thing I'm trying to work on also, is like just myself. I don't only want to see the dark side here.
Yeah.
there might be some positive. I want to go back to something in the very beginning, please, which is that back to cannabis and oxytocin and endocannabinoids. Will you explain to our listeners, and to me really, how you see the relationship between endocannabinoids and oxytocin? And maybe just remind people that what oxytocin is again. I did this interview completely in reverse, but that's life. Go on.
That's okay.
I thank you.
It'll be like a Mobius strip and you won't even know.
Yeah.
or Oribus or Oribus. I can't remember that word, like the snake that's eating its own tail. It's that. It's going to be that thing. Mm-hmm. Sorry, what was your question? No. So here's how I would start to answer that question is I would remind our listeners that humans are obligatorily social creatures, meaning that if we do not have social connections, we die. And we are designed to connect and to cooperate and to get tremendous pleasure from connecting. And the only way to connect and to cooperate is that you have to have a little bit of vulnerability and trust somebody so that you can bond with them. And the thing that allows you to trust and bond is oxytocin. And one of the ways that oxytocin works is that it dampens the amygdala response, which basically means that oxytocin can quell fear. Right. And so as much as when you're in fight or flight, if you could manage to flip over into parasympathetic, oxytocin is sort of what runs the parasympathetic system. And just the same way that adrenaline and cortisol runs the sympathetic, the fight or flight. Right. So oxytocin is sort of like the juice that keeps you in this place where you can rest and digest and repair and connect. Right. So this idea of like tending and befriending that you befriend people and you tend to them and you tend to your friendship with them, you tend to your relationship, all that trusting and bonding and tending and befriending, that's all oxytocin in the parasympathetic nervous system. But I said that connecting gives us pleasure, right? And the way that oxytocin gives pleasure is primarily through the endocannabinoid system. So in a way, this idea of like hugs, not drugs, the biology behind that is really actually pretty solid. That being held, feeling like you belong, like somebody has your back, makes you feel like a little bit high, and it keeps you coming back for more. And if it weren't right, if connecting weren't pleasurable, we wouldn't make babies.
Yes,
and and one of the times that you see very, very high oxytocin levels is around orgasm. And some of the ways that orgasm makes you feel good is via the endocannabinoid system. It's not the only one. I mean, actually, there's a lot of good chemistry that goes into an orgasm, and there's a lot of like good feeling. It's not just the endocannabinoids; it's also the endorphins and dopamine and a little bit of your body's own psychedelic phenylethylamine that gets released. If you, and actually I think women have this more than men, to be honest, but like sometimes you will have such a big orgasm that you almost feel like you have ego disintegration and you leave your body for a second. Like, ooh, where did I go? And I don't know if men ever get this, but some women do. And
I'll tell you, I'll be one to tell you, men sometimes do get that. Yes.
So I would say
it's not probably as long. I would say it's a faster response.
Actually, phenyl, the PEA, I believe, has got like a pretty short half-life along the lines of 30 seconds or so or less. But I talk about the chemistry of kissing and the chemistry of orgasm and the chemistry of pleasure, and these same neurotransmitters and hormones keep coming up, which is oxytocin and endocannabinoids and dopamine and the endorphins primarily. Your brain only has like so many ways to make you feel good, but everybody gets their own sort of proprietary blend of a bunch of different chemicals. And I wrote a little bit about natural childbirth because that was a very intense sort of altered state for me. And I felt really, really high, and my pupils were hugely dilated, and I had absolutely zero drugs. And I was really sort of interested in, that's a very high oxytocin state, also childbirth and nursing. So a lot of the things that really connect us to our babies or to our kids or to our mates are, oxytocin is what underlies that connection. And the endocannabinoids are what allows socializing to be pleasurable. basically. That's a long answer.
That's a lovely answer. First of all, I'm jealous. Women get more oxytocin than men. Certainly have more opportunities. I think they deserve it. I mean, if you're going through childbirth, I think women deserve it. Certainly. Let me just say that. But is there anything we can eat?
No.
Or obviously exercise is going to produce some of that dopamine or endocannabinoid response. Is there anything we can eat or do to sort of, in the absence of hugging? Or are there any drugs instead of hugs that we can use to get there in these times?
Well, there are. I do sort of list a bunch of things that you could do in the book that aren't drug related that can increase oxytocin, but it's true that a lot of them are things like get a massage or cuddle with your friend, but also our pets, right? Just having eye contact with your dog can increase your oxytocin levels. Looking at babies and kittens and puppies on the internet will probably do it. And I came across one article that suggested that internet porn, that when you have an orgasm, even if you're not with a human, even if you're just watching a movie of one or several humans having sex, that you still are going to have that increased oxytocin at the time of orgasm, even if you're looking at computer porn, which may
I fall in love with my screen then.
Exactly.
Great.
That is
Julie, that's fantastic.
Is that you may end up more trusting and bonded with your computer screen because you're having sex with your computer. So I don't have a lot of hard data to back that up, but I got some interesting studies. But
doesn't sound that promising.
Human connection, nipple stimulation, putting yourself in parasympathetic, just breathing through your nose, relaxing. And it may be that if you're the kind of person who gets, some people get chills when they listen to music, or they get chills. Have you heard of ASMR?
I've heard of it, and it always escapes me what it is.
It's this head tingle sort of a thing that you can get either by rubbing your head or by listening. Like some people get these sort of chills and head tingles, or people call them brain gasms or something, which is stupid. But those are high oxytocin states, and those are high empathy states. And people who have more empathy seem to have more access to oxytocin. Or, the other thing I have to say, as long as we're talking about women and men and oxytocin, is that oxytocin works better in an estrogen-rich environment, which may be why, women are a little bit better at tending and befriending, say, than. I mean, I can't even finish my sentence because it's not really fair.
I know where you're going to go. It's a bad sentence.
But I will say that there is a chemical called vasopressin that works more in men and less in women. And vasopressin, it's not quite about tending and befriending and cultivating all your relationships and making sure everybody's happy and has what they need and kumbaya. It's more about I'm going to make sure that me and my progeny are safe. And so vasopressin is more like a defensive strategy to make sure your genetic material is prospering than it is making sure that every single person in the community has what they need. And so this is one of the reasons why I really think it's important for women to be in government, because I think that physiologically and biologically, there may be more of an impulse. This like Jared Kushner, these are our resources. Like, I got mine, you got your, I got mine, you get yours, right?
Yeah.
As opposed to I want to make sure that we all have what we need. So to me, it's sort of like oxytocin versus vasopressin, and this, me versus we. And good chemistry talks a lot about politics. I totally get into politics and Trump being a traumatizer, and this issue of whether you're liberal or conservative, and how fear-based you are, and how willing you are to trust and bond and share with others. And it really comes down to this sort of lefty brain and right brain. And, I'm sure you could tell by me talking, I'm like a very lefty liberal. I'm the kind of person who, if there's a bunch of people having dinner, I'm sort of counting how many pieces of chicken, how many people, what should I take? I want to make sure everybody else has enough, But whereas some people will just put 3 or 4 on their plate because that's what they want. Fuck everybody else. So we're, on the other side of this virus, I think these are the kind of questions I hope that we can really start to talk about and address is, do we want to be communal and share our strengths and share our resources, or do we want to, everybody's going to be in their own silo and, screw you, I got mine, you go get yours.
Fighting for their own corner. That to me feels like dystopia. That feels like exactly the world I don't want to live in.
But I know what is interesting though, Joe? There's about a third of the country who thinks that the kumbaya everybody share is dystopia and the last thing in the world they want.
I know. I don't live with those people. They probably don't listen to this podcast. And if they do, I suggest they move somewhere else and start thinking in new ways. And certainly buy your book.
Right. So can we change hearts and minds, right? I mean, will this pandemic help people agree that it's better for everybody to have enough than some people to have tons and some not have enough?
I wish I could feel optimistic about that. Nothing I've ever read in history leads me to think we're going down that road. I just want to say that, but I would like you.
You're smoking the wrong strains.
No, I'm smoking the good stuff actually, but I didn't smoke any before this interview because I tend to go all over the place.
But I am also.
Can you bottle some of this oxytocin? Can you bottle some of that?
Well, there are nasal sprays and lozenges or troches. Actually, they're called. TROCHE. There are nasal sprays, and then there are like these little kind of lozenges that dissolve in your buccal mucosa so that you can have sublingual oxytocin. I don't know how well they work. You know what's funny, and said a lot about me. I'm a psychonaut, and I've tried all sorts of things. I'm 54, and I've been experimenting since I was about, if you count alcohol, 8. Cigarettes, I was 10, and pot, I was 12. Like, I got a really young start. I was just like this.
Yeah, we're the same. We're the same.
Little hoodlum with a cigarette who thought she looked cool. And perhaps I did. Or maybe stupid 10-year-old. I don't know. Where was I going with it? Cool. So anyway, my point is I've tried a lot of things. I am a novelty seeking. I am not risk averse. I have some oxytocin in my refrigerator that I have had for almost a year. I've got nasal spray and troches, and I have yet to try either one. So what is that about? So
that's about hold on to it. And when this is over, I'm coming up to visit you and I want to try it and we're going to hug.
Okay. Mostly I would say that people have been underwhelmed by the effects of exogenously applied oxytocin. Like nobody seems to be saying like this works great. I think there are doctors who are doing research on oxytocin with autistic spectrum disorders, that there may be something there. But I think it's hard to administer. And you can rub your arms. There's something called havening where you can kind of stroke your arms, and that may make you feel held and cared for and safe. And when you do havening, you stroke the upper arm from shoulder to elbow, both. Like, give yourself a hug. You stroke your upper arm from shoulder to elbow, and you can say things to yourself like, I am safe. I am loved. I am cared for. I am looked after. And if you can sort of convince yourself that that's really happening, you may get an oxytocin spike from that sort of thinking and rubbing. Or you could just, have sex with yourself. And that
I was thinking you could just masturbate. Right. It's another way of touching yourself. And it might be more satisfying in the end, I have to say.
Possibly. For a moment. And then,
Julie, I love you. I'm so glad we had this talk. I don't know if I'm going to be havening in the near future.
Be havening.
Tell me at least, when does Good Chemistry come out?
So it comes out June 16th. It's Harper Wave. And maybe, I don't know, some other time I'll talk about the book. I haven't gotten completely in like book PR mode. I'm so glad at least it's coming out. I was worried that, maybe it was canceled, I've been working on this for years and years, and it is a little frustrating that my message of like, get off your phone and hold each other. Like, we're going to have to put that on hold for a little bit, but there's a lot of other messages in the book that are still incredibly useful. And it's quite a bit about psychedelics and MDMA, which we didn't
we didn't even get to that, but let's have another conversation and we'll work on that. Maybe when the book comes out, let's do that. Okay. Let's have a June conversation about MDMA, one of my favorite substances, which could
Are
be
we
very
allowed to
useful.
talk about other drugs besides cannabis on Brave New Weed? I feel like I have to sort of always limit myself.
No, we're very expansive here. One of our upcoming interviews with the founder of the Psychedelics Founders Movement. No, we're very broad based here. We like all substances, okay? And they're related, and they need to go together.
Yeah.
And they have an interrelationship, and they're plants. And they're here for a reason. They're all here for the same reason, I believe. I don't think I'm alone in that. And I know you don't think so either.
The plant medicines can help us through this and after this. That's my soundbite.
I love it. Thank you so much for joining and spending all this time with me.
You are so very welcome. It's absolutely my pleasure.
Good. We'll talk again soon. Julie Holland, thank you so much.
Thank you, Joe Dolce, for your service and your work.
Hi, listeners. We are always on the lookout for great things to talk about on the Brave New Weed podcast, and we'd love to hear from you. You can always email us at bravenewweedcast@gmail.com with links to articles, interesting news stories, personal accounts of things that you've done, or leads on books or products that we should know about. You can always contact us at bravenewweedcast@gmail.com. Joe, again, huge thanks for taking the time to sit down with Julie and to share that conversation with us and with the listeners. I absolutely love having her on the show, as I said before. And it's really important right now. I think a lot of people are going through this disconnected feeling, this touch-starvedness. Touch-starvedness? That's a weird past tense to put there. But yeah, we're all touch-starved. We're all connection-starved.
We're connection-starved, exactly.
I love a couple of things from there, that the shifting of the fight or flight response into this connect and protect. It's great. It's a great way to frame it up. It's a great way to shift our psychological thinking on all this stuff. It's going to be weird when this, it's hard to say the phrase when all this goes back to normal, because I don't know that we go back to a normal. It's as you put it at the top of the show, all going to be a new normal. So,
well, I'm not so sure that normal was such a good idea anyway. I mean,
oh yeah,
hey,
if we can
just being able to take this pause for this long period, against our will, but I think we've all learned things in the pause. We've all learned that maybe some of our behavior is not making us happy, and certainly not contributing to our mental health or to our ability to connect to each other. I want to point out a few things, though, Matthew. I mean, in the book, Good Chemistry, Julie points out some really simple things to do in order to switch that fight or flight into the protect and connect. And they're really simple. She talks about them in the episode, but you can breathe, especially breathing through the nose or breathing through the left nostril. This is much better to activate that nervous system than breathing through the mouth, which tends to create anxiety. She also says, do nothing, just stop, which is sort of like what meditation does, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or
taking
sing.
a pause to be mindful.
Yeah, or do some singing or chanting. There's a real biological basis of this stuff. Mm-hmm. The idea is, the longer you exhale, the more calming is going to be created. She even suggests floating. If you can swim, it's another way of sort of bringing your body back to quiet. So these are really simple things that we can all certainly do now and think about doing them in the future, but understanding the biology of them is really, really interesting. And I think that's what you'll get after reading Good Chemistry. As she says, this is a practical book. It's not a course in miracles. Think about it as a cookbook with recipes for connection. So I think we leave you with that.
Thanks again for tuning in, everyone. And thanks again to our sponsor for this episode, Sun and Earth Certified, the nonprofit certification program for regenerative organic cannabis. Sun and Earth is committed to shifting the cannabis cultivation industry into a cleaner, healthier direction. And if you would like to find out more, you can visit their website at www.sunanearth.org.
Matthew, thank you for joining me. I look forward to talking to you on the next episode of the Brave New Weed podcast.
Thanks for listening to the Brave New Weed podcast. This episode and all future episodes are made possible by amazing listeners like yourself. If you like what you've heard, we encourage you to show your support by giving $1 a month for special access and rewards on patreon.com/bravenewweed. You can also follow us on Twitter and Instagram via @bravenewweed. Find us on Facebook at facebook.com/bravenewweed. And remember, you can always find more information about us or information discussed in each episode by pointing your favorite browser to bravenewweed.com.